Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. This week I'm enjoying the snowfall outside my craft room window and was in the mood to make a few shaker cards. Instead of the traditional shakers I usually make, I'm going to show how to make faux shakers with a simple snowflake background die. Let's go ahead and get started with the first card. For this card, I have a piece of pattern paper cut to 5.5 by 4 1/4. I'm going to be using these two snowflake dies from Honeybee Stamps to cut out my background today. I've also cut some vellum snowflakes, a layered thank you sentiment, and a 1/4 inch piece of cardstock that I've cut for this card. The first thing I'm going to do is cut out that snowflake background. Now there are two pieces to this die set. The first layer cuts out all the intricate snowflake background, and the second one creates the snowflake piercings. I love how you can use these two together or separately to create a card background. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the snowflakes from my white cardstock, which I've cut a little larger than I need it to be. You can see that there are quite a few little pieces that need to be removed. Now, I have been told that using a dryer sheet or wax paper does help when you're using intricate dies, but I forgot about that today, so I'm just going to use this little tool to remove the unwanted pieces. All right, now we're going to go ahead and do that second layer. This pierced layer fits perfectly on top of the cut snowflake background. And I found that a magnetic plate comes in handy because it helps to hold that second die right where I need it. Now, if you don't have a magnetic plate, you can also hold it in place with some Post-it tape. Let's go ahead and take a look at how beautifully these two layers work together. I love how that piercing just brings this background up another level. Okay, so now that the background's been cut, let's go ahead and assemble the shaker. I'm going to be using this Cricut acetate today, and I've already gone ahead and cut it down to create a little shaker window. And I'm going to adhere that acetate to the back of the snowflake background. Like I said, these cards today are going to be faux or fake shaker cards. These are much easier to mail because they're a little bit thinner than your traditional shakers. While this dries, I'm going to go ahead and assemble the thank you sentiment. This layered sentiment was cut from vellum, white cardstock, and a periwinkle colored cardstock. I think it might be bluebell, but I don't quite remember. I'm going to go ahead and just use a little glue to adhere these layers together. And as you can see, I am starting to run out of my favorite glue. It's been really hard to come by recently, and I need to find a place to order some more. Okay, so now our sentiment's done. We're going to go ahead and build our shaker. I'm going to start by adhering some snowflake sequins onto the pattern paper. With a faux shaker, there really isn't going to be much room for those little bits to move around. So we're going to create the illusion of a shaker card by randomly gluing the sequins in place. You can see that I adhered quite a few of those sequins to the bottom, as if they had all fallen down to the base of the card. And then I'm just going to randomly add others to the background paper to look like they've been shaken in the background. Now you can see there that I also sprinkled a small amount of microfine glitter onto the pattern paper over the snowflakes, and that's going to end up looking a little bit like snow in our faux shaker. I'm going to use some really thin foam tape to adhere these two pieces together, and by thin I mean not only in width but also in thickness. Now, I could just adhere the two pieces together with glue, but there might be a few little ridges or bumps where those layers of sequins are. So if I had used less sequins, I probably could have just stuck them together with adhesive for an even thinner card. But as you can see, it is still pretty thin, and it's a lot thinner than your traditional shaker, even after using some of that thinner foam tape. Because we have the acetate and the sequins, it really does look a lot like a shaker card. But like I said, this is going to be a lot easier to mail. All right, let's go ahead and finish up this design. I'm going to use just a little bit of adhesive to adhere that thank you sentiment in place. And then I'm going to add some soft layers of vellum to the front with those snowflake die cuts. Now, like I said, I cut these out using some dies, and I love how they just add a little bit of softness to the front of the card. These are going to be adhered in place using some micro glue dots. Now, for the rest of the sentiment, I'm just going to use this little sticker, which I'm going to layer on top of that cardstock strip. I'm going to cut a little chevron into one end, and then I'll adhere in place with some foam tape right under that thank you sentiment. Now, the last thing I'm going to add are some gems to the centers of the snowflakes to add a little bit of sparkle to the card. Right now, I'm using bitty sparkles, but you'll notice in the photographs at the end of the video that I end up changing these out for larger gems, which I like a lot better. All right, now our first card is complete. Once again, it does look a lot like a shaker with the acetate and the little sequins inside, but because of the way it's assembled, it's much thinner and easier to mail than a traditional shaker. All right, let's go ahead and start on the second card. On this card, we're going to create another snowflake background using Distress Oxide inks. So I'll be cutting the background from Distress watercolor cardstock. I'm going to be adding a little bit of sparkle to the background with some frosted crystal embossing powder, which will be applied to the card with embossing ink. I'm also going to be adding a beautifully layered winter anemone, which I cut from a honeybee die. I'm going to add a little strip of checked pattern paper and another sentiment on a little 1/4-inch strip of cardstock. Let's go ahead and start creating the background. So as you can see, I have not cut out that snowflake background yet. Since that die is so intricate, I discovered that it was much easier to add the ink to the cardstock before cutting it out. I'm going to start by using a blending tool to apply some speckled egg to the center of the cardstock. I'm going to add a few layers of ink to create a nice bright blue there in the center. Now, once I've added a couple layers of speckled egg ink, I'm going to apply chipped sapphire around the edges. Now you can see here that I'm using a little piece of paper to hold my cardstock. This is going to prevent any fingerprints from getting onto the ink and prevent some ink from getting onto my fingers, because inevitably if I get ink on my fingers, it's going to end up on everything else. All right, so after I've added that chipped sapphire, I'm going to come back with the speckled egg and blend the two colors together. Now on camera, it doesn't show up as well when you are creating the blend, but it looks beautiful right now on this cardstock. Now, if you want, you can keep adding layers of ink to deepen the colors and increase the blend, or you could just add another color of blue to brighten up the front of the card. Now I want to add a little bit of worn texture to the ink, so I'm going to spray the cardstock with some water. The Distress Oxide inks are water reactive, so the droplets are going to create a speckled look in the ink. Now, isn't that pretty? All right, so off camera, I've gone ahead and cut out that background, and I did add the pierced design to the cardstock. I love how the two blues blend together on those snowflakes. Now I want to give these a wintry feel with frosted crystal embossing powder. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to apply with this embossing dauber. I'm going to start by priming the dauber over here on my silicone mat to get the ink flowing. And then I'll just start applying the embossing ink onto my background with the little foam dauber. It is a really thick and sticky ink, so you want to make sure that you do this on a surface you can easily wipe off when you are done. After adding ink to half of the background, I'm going to sprinkle it with the embossing powder, and then I'll continue applying the embossing ink to the background. Now, this embossing ink doesn't dry quickly, but I have found that the watercolor cardstock does absorb the ink. So it was best for me to do this in stages. Once I've added all the powder to the snowflakes, you can see that it does have a matte finish. But once I apply heat, that powder is going to start to shine. I'm just going to use my heat tool to carefully heat the powder. This is a lot like other embossing powders, but you're going to notice that as I move that heat tool around on the background, it quickly changes from matte to shiny. Now, this is also a distress embossing powder, so it does have a little bit of texture to it, which adds even more to the design. All right, now that the background's finished, let's go ahead and build our faux shaker. So I'm going to adhere this background onto some white glitter paper. I'm not going to be using any foam tape or acetate this time. Instead, I'll be adhering the sequins and clay bits directly to the background to make it look like a shaker card. I'm just going to add some little dots of glue randomly onto the glitter paper, and then I'll adhere my snowflake sequins and snowflake clay bits to the background. Now let me go ahead and zoom in here so that it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. You're going to see that I often tuck them underneath the little snowflake cut background. This is going to give the illusion of a shaker card, because when you shake a shaker card, those little bits often fall behind your background. I'm not going to add too many of the sequins or clay bits to the card because I don't want to take away from that beautifully inked background. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this finished background piece. I love how those random bits appear to be floating behind the background just like a shaker card, but it is so much thinner than a traditional shaker. All right, let's go ahead and decorate this card. I'm going to add a little strip of checked pattern paper to the base. I'm just going to wrap this around the card front and use my mat here to make sure everything's nice and straight. And then once that has been added, I'll go ahead and adhere this down onto a card base. Now the next step is to create that beautiful winter anemone. Now I know that the purpose for creating the faux shakers was so that the card wasn't as thick as a traditional shaker. But if you have watched any of my card tutorials, you know that I love adding lots of layers to my design. So I am shaping each of the layers and I'm giving them dimension, and I'm adding foam tape in between all of those petal layers because I like having a big, bold flower. If you want a thinner flower, you can easily build one without foam tape and all the shaping. This flower die has some beautiful embossing to it, and it looks just as stunning without all of the bulk. All right, so before I add the center to my flower, I'm going to ink the edges with some of that chipped sapphire ink. I'm also going to add a little ink to the edges of my leaves and to the center of the leaves just to give them a little bit of dimension. And you can see here that I'm also adding a little bit of shape to my leaves to create some curl on the edges. The two center pieces of the flower are going to be layered together with foam tape. This die set does have another center piece with some little dots, but I'm going to be using some little pearls instead. I just need to add a little bit of glue to the center, and then I'm going to pour those little silver pearls on the top. I'll go ahead and use my tweezers to clean up the excess, and then I'm just going to add this to the center of the flower. I love how these add so much to the flower design and give it the look of a real flower. Now I can go ahead and adhere this flower to the right side of the card with a little bit of foam tape. Like I said, if you don't want all of that bulk, you don't need to use the foam tape. It looks great with just all of the layers glued flat together. I'm going to go ahead and tuck those little leaves behind the flower. Let me go ahead and move this one around a little bit so it doesn't go off the edge of the card. And then I'm going to add the sentiment. Because there's so much going on with this card, I'm going to keep the sentiment really simple, and I'm going to use another little sticker from this Small Talk sticker book. I'm going to layer the sticker onto a piece of cardstock, trim it down just a little bit, and then I'll adhere it to the card right beside that flower. The last little element is a loop of silver embellishing thread. To create the loop, I'm just going to wrap the thread around my fingers, and then I'll adhere the loops together with a glue dot, and then I'm just going to tuck that right underneath the top of the flower. And now our second faux shaker is complete. Let's go ahead and take a look at the two cards created today. The first card looks like a shaker with the acetate and bits of sequins and glitter inside, but it is so much thinner than your traditional shaker card. Those little layers of vellum don't add any bulk, but they do create a beautiful soft layer on the front of the design. The second card has such a stunning background with the blended inks, glitter paper, and snowflake shapes. Again, this appears to be a shaker, but it isn't. Now, I did create some bulk with that flower, but you can easily modify it to create another thin faux shaker card. I'm going to show you a few up-close photos of these two cards, which you can also read about on my blog today. I love how each of these cards turned out with their soft, wintry feel and bits of shimmer. They were so fun to create while the snow fell outside my craft room window today. I hope that you enjoyed today's project and were inspired to create a few faux shaker cards of your own. If you would like to learn more about this project, I've added a list of supplies and a link to my blog in the description below. You can also click on the link above to see more of my card making tutorials. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, and while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe so that you're notified when I add another video to my channel. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.